So welcome to the Scale-up Marketing Roundtables. This is the first of 5 sessions where we're talking about what really is marketing for scale-ups. So I'll just quickly run through the agenda and some housekeeping, just so that we get into the really interesting part as soon as we can, because obviously we've got a short amount of time to get a lot of really great value content in, and you don't want to hear reams of introductory stuff. But obviously we'll kick off housekeeping, we'll go through, then I'll hand over to Tom Dewhurst, who's going to go through his presentation this morning, which is all about what is marketing for scale-ups. So just quickly then, housekeeping wise, so each session is slated for 30 to 45 minutes. Where obviously you've heard already that we're recording the sessions, and the idea is that we can make these available to you afterwards, so that if there's bits you want to recap on, you've got that knowledge available to you for as long as you need it. They are roundtables, so please, let's make them conversational, discussion based. Obviously, we've got some slides that we're going to run through at the start of each roundtable, but please don't be shy in asking questions. And certainly when we get to the end of the session, there'll be about 15 to 30 minutes of time for you to pose your questions on any of the content or any specific challenges that you're trying to overcome right now. If you could keep yourselves on mute whilst you're not talking, it looks like everyone has already done that, so that's really good. Thank you very much. That minimizes the background noise. I'll be the worst offender there because my dog at some point will explode when the postman arrives, so apologies in advance for that moment, as it will happen if I haven't got my mic on mute. And as you have seen, there are 5 roundtables in 5 weeks, and I'll come on to just talking through each of those in a second. But to highlight, the roundtable has been put together by Agency Squared, Ed Davidson Marketing, Growth Division, and ISL Talent. For those that don't know me, my name is Andy Bargery, and I run Agency Squared. So briefly then, what are the 5 sessions? The first one today is what is marketing for scale-ups? That's going to be led by Tom Dewhurst from Growth Division. Then we go on to session number 2, which is on the 3rd of May. So please make a note of the dates as we go through. So what type of scale-up marketing do you need? That's going to be led by Ed Davidson. Session number 3 on the 12th of May. What does marketing cost and how do you measure ROI, so return on investment, led by Tristan Gillen from Growth Division. Session 4 is you've got a marketing problem, should you hire, on the 18th of May. That's going to be led by Alan Furley. And then finally on the 27th of May, finding and hiring the best fit agency for your startup. And that's a session that I'm going to lead. So please make sure you've got all those dates in your diaries, and I'll send out joining instructions with Zoom links, etc., a bit nearer to the time for each of those. So with the housekeeping done, I'm going to pass over to Tom Dewhurst, who is going to lead you through the next 10 or 15 minutes, hopefully sharing some really good knowledge bombs around marketing for scale-ups. So Tom, over to you. Do you want me to stop sharing so you can share yours?
Yeah, that'd be great, Andy. Thanks.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, can everyone see my screen if I go on slideshow? Oh,
yes, I can.
Well, yeah, thanks for joining. I'm really looking forward to this session. And yeah, as Andy said, we're looking to try to make this as interactive as possible. And it is a round table. So, do ask any questions as I go along. Shout out, it'll be great to kind of hear from you as we go through. So yeah, I'm Tom. I'm one of the founders of Growth Division with Tristan here as well. We're a growth marketing consultancy that helps startups and high growth companies find scalable channels to market. That was our background. Previously, we founded a technology company called Alldo for 5 years or so, which was a mobile app, and we sold it to an investor a couple of years ago. And we're now really passionate about helping other startup founders with their marketing challenges, and just trying to find scalable channels to market. We identified a few problems with startups, hiring generalist marketers, and so we brought in loads of specialists, not using data constructively, and so we built some very sophisticated kind of data like analysis tooling, and ultimately kind of sticking to these frameworks that we're going to outline today, rather than running around like headless chickens, which is often the case in the startup world. We've been lucky to work with some really awesome startups so far over the last couple of years. We worked probably over 50 or so. Kind of some of these highlights here. Weaver, for example, they've just raised $40 million, and we were working with them since 2020 when they launched. Adland just raised 10 million, and they were kind of a land marketplace, kind of disrupting kind of the old archaic land buying industry. And some really awesome companies doing great things like Ecology, kind of a tree planting platform, and some other ones like Seed Legals you might have heard of as well. So yeah, we've kind of seen it all in general, and yeah, hopefully kind of sharing some of that knowledge today, and what we've seen worked and not work, I suppose. But ultimately, we're just trying to, the scope of this session really is to kind of set the scene for the series. And so we really want to just make sure everybody's on the same page with what is scale-up marketing, and making sure you're fully aware of like what the options are here. So before kind of really diving into the content and marketing, I think it's actually important to take a step back and look at kind of product market fit first. I mean, does anyone feel confident that they've kind of hit product market fit yet, or is anyone sort of do you know what it is? Anyone want to have a go at it?
I can have a quick stab at it. So I think product market fit is essentially, long story short, if you take away a product from a group of customers, and most of them would say they would be really sad if they didn't have that product anymore. In terms of whether we found that product market fit, we're kind of in the thick of growing our first kind of 1,000 true fans. So we're still kind of exploring that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, and exactly that, Victoria. There's a number of different ways to kind of validate and measure it. The one you mentioned there is that 40% of your customer base would be very dissatisfied if you took it away from them. That's a really good sign of product market fit. One of the kind of I suppose ways of looking at this is like how HubSpot describe it. Like you say, it's like whether the value proposition, what you kind of set out as the kind of key value that your business does for customers, is actually resonating with them and their needs. And then ultimately you're conveying that in the right channels that enables you to kind of sustain your business, and a little bit cheesy on the name of HubSpot of like enables you to bring the success you're looking for. So ultimately you kind of, I think the kind of key thing there is you sort of get a feeling when you're on product market fit. Things are just working. Customers are coming to you, they're telling their friends, they're buying, and you kind of get that feeling of a kind of flywheel underway, and I think that's the kind of what you should be shooting for. As I said, there's a lot of different ways of cutting this, but I wanted to look at it from the perspective of brand versus growth marketing, which is obviously the kind of topic for today. And I suppose at a startup level, you can get quite far with a brand. If you've got a really strong vision and a really clear message, customers are going to buy into that, and you can start with like a community and without any product, to talk of in the first instance. And so, you can build, almost product market fit just off a brand and a brand message, and have like a relatively kind of thin product underneath it. On the other extreme, it might be very kind of technical or engineering and sales led, where there's not much of a marketing and brand, but you're really close to your customers. You know what they want, what pain points they have, and therefore you're building a product to meet those with quite, without much kind of, noise. And so, there are a couple of ways of doing it. I think generally speaking, so somewhere sitting between the kind of product and marketing kind of function here is sort of like what I would suggest as a kind of a place to aim, where there is a happy medium between brand marketing and growth marketing. So you have a strong brand and a big mission, but your product is meeting the needs of those customers. You have like kind of marketing and growth marketing loops within the product, and they are obviously kind of working together with your marketing team to to drive growth. So yeah, I thought that's an interesting way of looking at it. But with that in mind, assuming that you're on your road to product market fit, obviously the market element of that relies on the customer, and the customer is can be quite nuanced, and again, that's what we want to dive on into here, is like, how do we segment these customers and ultimately position the business to reach them. At Growth Division, we like to do it quite a kind of data-driven way. We built this spreadsheet, which I can touch on in a second. You can do the kind of like customer persona builder, where you kind of name them. That is an effective way of doing it, and you can kind of create not too many, like two or three max, kind of personas. But ultimately, you want to start to build up that picture of who your customer is. And we like to break that down as like demographic data, firmographic data, psychographic data, so kind of like the kind of emotions and feelings, and then obviously then what the outputs of that are in terms of like messaging and data. I've actually, if I stop sharing my screen, if my computer's gonna let me, I can see what I'm doing. I can share this with you, which is a kind of builder that we've created that enables you to kind of put the kind of personas down the left-hand side, and then build out kind of like a matrix of that information. So as I said, kind of these data points that we're looking after, and then ultimately kind of what the messaging kind of is going to be for each of those personas, and what are their value proposition statements for each of those elements, and ultimately where you find these, like where are they hanging out online, can you build up like data sets to them and reach out to them, etc. And so when we talk about kind of growth marketing, I think this is a really good starting point of like being super clear on who your customer is, and what they're like, what they're looking to achieve. Tristan, do you mind sharing this template on the chat? Or like,
yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do that.
Going back to this. And one of those elements was what we like to be called the jobs to be done. So within the messaging, we find it really helpful to kind of get into the kind of mindset of the customer by using this framework. It's quite unknown. So again, has anyone heard of jobs to be done? No. Yes, it is quite unknown. It's just really helpful for like understanding the situation that the customer's in. Like, when might they buy from you? Like, what's their kind of, what happened to them? Is there a trigger point that kind of instigates their like need for your product? What are they like then looking to achieve in terms of like the motivation and outcome? You've got to get over that hurdle of like apathy, which is like a marketer's worst nightmare. Can you then instigate some emotional response within them? Like, how does it make them feel? And then like reflect that on a kind of wider network there. So for growth division's context, it can sometimes be along the lines of like, when a startup raises funding, they need to kind of grow in order to achieve their results, making them feel like proud of their business and ultimately look good in front of investors. And so when you can start to target people like at those trigger points with the right messaging, it's where you can really start to grow. I also added a bit in around the brand. So that's quite a growth marketing centric approach. But as we're kind of reflecting on here, is comparing it to brand as well. And so I included our brand model here because I have got another example that I can share. And this is like a kind of exercise that to be honest, we don't do a lot of branding ourselves, but like this is something we worked with a brand consultant to do, just to kind of like really think through like what is the core essence of the brand. What do we hear? What do we stand for? How do we position that in the market? What are we promising our customers? Like, what do we kind of stand by? And then ultimately, how does that like translate into kind of tone of voice and values? And I suppose all that together kind of, is a brand essentially. And there are then obviously brand guidelines and imagery and documentation you can kind of build off the back of that. And so, look, when we're looking at brand versus growth marketing, I think they do go hand in hand. And I think it's super important to take the time up front to define your brand. And this is about maybe 18 months old. So like if you do it correctly at the start, it can last for years. And it's worth the investment in my view. And then you can build out your kind of customer personas and your kind of channels to market. And so that actually is a nice segue into the channels to market bullseye framework piece. But so far, has anyone got any questions on that or anything? Anything they want to clarify? Otherwise, I can crack on. Okay, so I suppose that's the foundations, I suppose, of your marketing, and kind of now looking forward in terms of like taking that to market, and I suppose the latter half of that value kind of product market fit statement is like you are targeting your customers in the right channels. And so this is a bit that we love to work on at Growth Division is identifying those channels to market, and actually then like testing and validating whether you can actually reach those kind of hypothesized customers through that channel. And so we use this framework called the bullseye framework. It's not our framework, like we have to admit. It's a great book by Gabrielle Weinberg, and it looks at like the 20 traction channels, which in theory are the entirety of your options to go to market, and then kind of through a series of activities, which I'll go through in the next slide, you can kind of start to pin down sort of 3 to 6 over a 6-month period that you can use to go to market. And so we've adapted that slightly to categorize them and kind of make them into these sort of organic direct content ones. But broadly speaking, it's about kind of creating a marketing strategy or a channel strategy for you, looking at kind of all stages of the funnel. So the process of that is brainstorming across all the channels. Like, again, it's easy to default to the ones you think will work, but like do take the time to go through all of them, prioritize them, rank them, pin down, say 3 to 6 to test over a 6-month period, and then really focus on those channels. Like, don't jump around. You're trying to find out like how much does it cost to acquire a customer, how many customers are there in that channel, and how well do they convert. And so we like to look at it. It's a sort of like at a startup level where you should be spending 50% of your time on this, like marketing, and 50% of your time on product. And this kind of process of growth marketing is similar to the kind of lean startup methodology for product. So it's a kind of taking a very analytical and experimentation driven approach to growth. And it means that you can be really confident in, testing, iterating, and not jumping around and looking at all the new shiny objects. So there is an example of bullseye at Mint. You can look it up for more examples. They sold to Intuit for 170 million, and in the first 6 months they had 100,000 user sign up target. They basically whittled it down to, I think it was PR, target market blogs, and Google ads. Found out that partnering with these kind of target market blogs in the financial sector worked really well, and ultimately doubled down on that with some PR and got to 1 million users within 6 months. So it can be a really effective strategy if done correctly. So yeah, that was a whirlwind of what is marketing with their kind of brand and growth marketing kind of comparison. Hopefully that was useful. And yeah, opening up to any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. I thought that was really interesting. I don't know if you want to unshare your screen so we can get everybody back up. That's probably better, isn't it? So does anyone have any questions that, based on what Tom's talked about, or any challenges you're currently facing that you would like to pick our collective brains, to use a horrible expression, on? If not, I've got a couple that I would like to ask Tom, but let's see if anybody else has any questions before I pose a couple to you. So let's quick look around the table. Any questions?
I do have a question.
Super. Thanks, Victoria.
So I guess, I'm with this bullseye framework. It's something I'm actually familiar with, and I have had challenges when I've tried to implement it. Mainly the challenge being you're whittling down from 15 plus traction channels, and when you're a small startup and you're trying to essentially maximize on your existing resources, I think the main challenge was how to effectively test and learn when you have limited budget, limited time as well. It's like, how do you approach that in the most efficient way possible, I guess would be my question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's always a challenge to do that. I think, yeah, you have to be really realistic with your budget and targets. In the first instance, it sounds like you're clear on that, which is good. But obviously, the more budget you put in, the more channels you can test. And so, we recommend testing at least 2, ideally 3 to 6, basically, because often I see startups kind of relying on one channel to market. Like, they're just like, oh, I'm just going to do Google ads, or I'm just going to do direct outreach or something like that. And I get that that's appropriate sometimes with constrained resources, but you kind of a very risk then of that not working, because not every channel is going to work. And You know, if that doesn't work, you're kind of 6 months down the line and you haven't got any customers. And so it's really important, in my view, to like test a minimum of 3, so that you know, your chances then are like of something going to work. And then, you know, depending upon your budget, you've just got to be realistic with what you can afford, and look at those channels, you know, under the kind of context that we put it. So like, there's a nice balance of like long-term and short-term type results, basically. Yeah, Tristan, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I've got some background noise now.
Yeah, no, I think you know, a sensible way to look at it, and actually in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be running one of these sessions on like basically building out your budgets and resources. So it could be useful for you to join that session. But yeah, a useful way to think about it is, you know, what is your kind of growth budget over the next few months? You know, internally, where do you have some sort of skill sets for you to be able to internally manage and own specific channels? And where can you kind of outsource to experts to bring in sensible cost, someone to bring in and test and validate a specific channel to market as well? And, you know, there are a lot of good freelancers out there, and if you can be very strict with kind of your budgets and where you're allocating allocating them and outsourcing, I think that's kind of the best way to think about it. It's definitely a difficult thing, and as you say, you know, all startups kind of face this where they've got limited budgets. So I think that the 2 points really are like being clear around the high impact channels and focusing on those. And then secondly, you know, where you can outsource and bring in an expert and where your budgets allow, it's just a case of kind of, you know, thinking through that and kind of bringing in people where you can. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult challenge.
Thank you both.
I'm interested, Victoria, like when you were doing the bullseye framework, were you kind of setting a kind of timeline as well of like how long you were going to try those channels for, or were, you know, what was your kind of approach there?
Yeah, honestly, when I was kind of first implementing that framework, it was a bit of a haphazard approach. And I think kind of focusing on, let's say, testing 3 channels per month might be a better approach. And it just kind of adds a bit more logic to the kind of, it can be overwhelming, I guess. Yeah,
I think an important point to sort of emphasize there is actually, like, we tend to run these on a 6-month cycle, because again, often, like, if you're trying to do too much in a month, you don't actually give yourself enough time to kind of iterate and kind of get to the bottom of something that works. Like, we see it time and time again, like month 4 maybe or 5, where you unlock that growth, and it's like, you know, it takes a lot of time, not a lot of time, but like it takes an extended period of time, like, you know, at least 3 months to kind of really know whether that channel is working or not. And like, a big problem we see is that, you know, there's so much options out there. You kind of, oh, let's do Google ads this month. Oh, it didn't work. Let's go do Facebook ads this next month. Oh, that didn't work. And you end up trying everything and then thinking nothing works. But actually, you need to just give it the time to test and build. And that's, again, the other part of this is the very kind of data-driven experimentation approach. Like, you don't just set it and let it run. You've got to be like focusing on it, trying new things, and then you know, hopefully something will click, and then you'll be able to unlock that channel.
I think that's if I can jump in, so Tom, that's a really good shout as well. I think as well, Victoria, just having as much quant understanding in terms of the data that comes through, but also qual as well, is if you can speak to the customers that you're acquiring through the channels and understanding that kind of process, especially when you have small budgets, so you can't necessarily get to statistical significance, and you're having those, you know, those early stages, being able to have those conversations with the customer to also understand both the channels that were driving activity, but also the conversion rate process through your kind of product or service. I think that's an important consideration as well, and that especially important at the early stages, but also how you scale up and then how you double down on certain channels as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Anybody else got any burning questions they'd like to pose to the panel? Okay, if not, let me pose one in terms of, we've talked about brand versus growth marketing. What's the right emphasis? What's the right balance for those two different perspectives at the early stages of moving from I've started it, but now I'm ready to scale? How do we shift that? How do we prioritize?
Yeah, I was trying to sort of weigh up on both sides of the argument there, and it's a tricky one. I think you know, as I was kind of alluding to, it is a bit of both. I don't, you know, you can get away with, you know, really big vision and a big mission to start with, and kind of get people to follow that. But ultimately, it will, you know, when you're kind of scaling up, you need to have that kind of data-driven channel approach, which in my view is much more aligned to kind of growth marketing and you know, I think generally speaking, with, you know, startups like to be able to see like the return on investment and track through all that data, which tends to be much more like growth marketing driven, and you can start to really put more money into the channels that are working confidently, and then revisit the kind of big brand marketing when you've got, you know, the coffers to do that, and you know, to build that kind of, you know, brand recognition. I think my previous business we tried to do too much brand marketing too soon, and it's easy to waste loads of money on like PR and, you know, ads and all this sort of stuff, and that look really good, and maybe, you know, from a vanity perspective, you're like, oh, you know, people know about the business now, but actually didn't really manifest in any kind of like revenue or tangible results. And so it's easy to spend a lot of money on that and not see any return. So in my view, it's like, get the brand, you know, and the mission done and sorted at the start, then hit growth marketing up until, you know, probably like, you know, Series A, B sort of time, and then start to turn on the kind of brand building exercises.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, marketing effectiveness studies, for, I guess, for larger organizations rather than the startup, shows the balance should be more in favor of brand investment rather than sales activational stuff. But I think at the startup phase, you know, there's no point investing in brand because that might take, you know, 3 to 5 years to see that return on investment. Whereas as a startup, you haven't got that long, have you, really? If you're going 3 to 5 years, you won't be around. So changing the emphasis so you're focused more on those growth marketing tactics and using the bullseye framework sounds like a very smart approach.
Yeah, maybe once you've reached product market fit, you know, that's when you can start to confidently turn on the brand taps. You know, as I say, like, I think if you do it too early, you actually, you know, you might change your customer, for example. You never know, like you might have to pivot away from that, and it's just, you know, money down the drain. So yeah, it's all about timing in my view, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive.
Yeah, great. Okay.
So I suppose that the one thing I'd add is that obviously you're trying to find product market fit. I think the reference I quite like is message market fit, as well, as if you guys have heard of that. So it's also finding, you know, the messaging or the wording or the positioning that resonates well as well. And I think that's, you know, potentially part of your brand, and getting that right so customers have that aha moment where they just get it. And then if you then put more fuel in the fire through the channels to be able to have those conversions, I think that's a good part that complements it. Obviously, as you move from kind of startup mode where you're more doing kind of direct response activity, you're getting the benefit there and you're seeing what works. When you start opening up kind of brand awareness and opening up the, you know, kind of wider channels above that, higher in the funnel, you need to be able to make sure that messaging resonates with that market as well. So I think that's an important thing to nail down as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. I agree with that. Yeah, and I think that leads on just I guess a question that follows on from both of those two is product market fit and message market fit. What are the typical metrics? And I know that Tristan's going to go into measurement in the next roundtable, but are there any typical metrics that you use to measure whether you have attained that fit, whether it's product or message?
Well, yeah, Victoria touched on it at the start. There is I don't know what it's necessarily called, but it's like I think it is actually called product market fit test, where you send out a survey of, like, you know, a simple question like, you know, how I think it's like, how satisfied would you be if we took the product away from you? And it's like, if you get 40% of people very dissatisfied, then you can confidently say you've got product market fit. That's kind of like a bit of a Silicon Valley benchmark. But as I said, like in my view, it actually is a bit more of a gut feel. You know, I think you can kind of tell when, you know, the messages is resonating, the customers are buying from you, everything's kind of moving in the right direction. it's hard to really put like a finger on like, this is the metric to say we have it. But it's more like, you hit that inflection point of your growth. And then you can kind of like make those investment decisions and brand and that sort of thing, like I suggested.
Got you. So I guess that refer that question over to Victoria then. So did you put that survey out to your customers and get some qualitative or quantitative response on that, or are you kind of running on more of that gut feel and just trying to get to that first 1,000 customers?
I think it's well, first of all, we did put out surveys, but it wasn't so much targeted at trying to get a feel for product market fit. It was more kind of general, like, what are your perceptions on our pricing, any feedback, etc. And from that survey, we actually found that we gotten mostly like maybe 90% plus positive feedback from our customers, which was great. And I definitely agree. I think that was definitely like a Silicon Valley model, whereas there is an element there where there is a gut feel approach. And so, the business, for example, has been running for 2 years, and we, just went through a big rebrand. And we've seen previous customers hop on to this next phase of our growth. And so for me, that was, it's a big risk, I guess, to inject money into doing a bit of a rebrand. And well, not a bit, but massive. And so seeing that was for us the product market fit. So yeah, now it's just kind of like tweaking messaging, as you mentioned, Edward, and it's like what messaging lands with the customers. So it's a definitely test model that we're going with right now.
And so the other classic thing as well is that in terms of the tone of voice that you're using, is that kind of tied to yourself as a founder and the story of the brand, or is it kind of a new direction based on a new kind of ethos for new customer set? I suppose it's interesting how often it's tied to the kind of original founder, and then it kind of grows over time as you start to scale. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a good point, because I think, to create, in my opinion at least, to create a brand that's scalable, it's like, how do you I guess become more relatable to your customer? And so one of the interesting things that we did is we created an alpaca, Alan the alpaca, which would be the front-facing tone of voice of the company. And we've seen that land really well with our customers, and they found it really relatable. There's elements of humor there. So yeah, it's really about testing, kind of moving away as a founder in a way, not being so front-facing. Obviously, your role as a founder is really kind of tied into the story of the brand, but at the same time, how do you make it more scalable?
No, a shout to my session for next week. I kind of talk about that a little bit. I just like the idea of building a moat through the brand as well, in terms of helping to differentiate, really, especially in a kind of crowded marketplace after you've kind of found product market fit. So yeah, sounds good.
Okay, any other questions from around the table? Around the round table.
I don't know, Tom, do you have any idea of how to like measure brand like impact on brand investment? Because like when you're looking at like some of the more performance-based channels, like Google ads or Facebook ads, it's very easy to understand like what your return on your ad spend is, for instance, or what your return on the channel spend is. But like when you're actually investing into your brand, it's a lot more difficult. It's not as tangible. So it'd be interesting to hear if you have any ways of measuring that.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Thanks for teaming me up with that one.
I know.
What a hospital pass that is.
Yeah. It is a really tough question. I think there are those kind of like really top level metrics that you've just got to be kind of keeping a track on, in my view, like the kind of just general like website sessions, and if you can track any like referral based metrics, like that tends to be when the brand is working, in my view, like especially in the B2C context. Like if people are talking about you and you can see like people are referring and that's kind of happening, that's generally where your brand investment is paying off, because it's just kind of exponential leverage on that. But yeah, it's very hard. I don't know, Ed or Andy, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if anyone here is on the kind of B2B side of things, but I'm a bit of a Chris Walker fanboy at the moment. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him, but look him up. It's kind of fascinating there. And a lot of the discussion, which both B2C and B2B, is like kind of what's in that dark social or dark funnel. So stuff you can't track and you can't attribute, and it's so difficult to attribute in that way. But again, I suppose it's referring back to that position where you get a chance to actually have this discussion with customers, to actually hear where they've come from and really try and drill down on it to understand if the kind of brand metrics or the brand activity is having a positive impact. But also, the more you do that and understand that it's going to have such an impact to your cost per acquisition, to your CAC, because getting people who are coming to your brand, as Tom says about referring, they're going to be a lot cheaper to acquire, and therefore your blended cost per acquisition gets far better. And as you start scaling up and pouring more fuel on the fire, that's so important to bring down your cost per acquisition. So it's getting to a view of that. And yeah, as much as you can collect that information within form fields or make it open, it's a lot harder to do, obviously, from an attribution perspective. And it will get harder in terms of all the tracking as we get to more of a cookieless world as well. So that kind of brand understanding becomes more important as well.
Yeah, I think
I share.
CAC is the big one. I think, yeah, if you're getting like more customers and lower acquisition costs, that means your brand investment's working.
Yeah, I think I share some of Tom's sentiments earlier around referrals as well. So some simple things you could do to start getting a sense as to investment in brand, measuring net promoter score, or amount of people that will put a review, what kind of reviews you're getting, or share of search, brand searches, people searching for your particular brand name rather than the product area, gives you a sense as to whether you're raising awareness. But some of the bigger brand measurement tools are, out of reach of the average startup. So try and pick off some of those simple tools. But ultimately, Ed's point around cost per acquisition is really important, isn't it? The more people know who you are, the less you're going to pay to get them on through the front door in the first place. So I don't think that perhaps adds a little bit to that. Okay, we're approaching the end of the first session. Before we wrap it up, just once more around the table, any further questions, any pieces of insight we would like to grab from Tom or Ed or Tristan who are on the call? Or is everyone ready to go off and get some lunch? Is it sandwich time?
And any other questions that you do have, maybe kind of offline, if we're happy, Andy, to kind of receive them via email, and then we can maybe follow them up slightly kind of other sessions as well in terms of feedback as we go into the other sessions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really happy to, and we hope that you'll all join us for all 5 of the roundtables. So if a question crops up between now and the next session, which is on Tuesday, the 3rd of May, so just next week, then do pop them across. You've all got my email. I can send them across to the team. We'll consider those in advance. So otherwise, if not, I think we're pretty much done for this first roundtable. Thanks everyone for attending. Thanks Tom, Tristan, Ed for sharing your pearls of wisdom. And I hope that everyone will join us on Tuesday, 3rd of May for the next session, which is what type of scale-up marketing do you need? Ed, do you want to have a quick pitch for your session? How are you going to blow our guests' socks off with your knowledge?
I think that Tom has really kind of set the foundations really well there in terms of what we need. I've got this format of the 4 fits, which builds on kind of product market fit, channel market fit, but also kind of the other kind of channels as well in terms of positioning. And then I think, moving forward as a startup, I think you are very generalist in the approach. As you start kind of scaling up, it becomes a lot more kind of focused, and the way that you're focusing based on the activities. And as we kind of move into other sessions, who you're bringing into the team and the kind of thought process you're going through into is kind of consideration. So this is, the next step in the series to kind of work out what type of marketing you're going to apply and how you're moving in terms of that 80-20 classic format to specializing and how you go about doing that. So I'll kind of lay out the process for that. Looking forward to it.
Sounds really good. Thank you very much.
Bright and breezy after the bank holiday, so everyone should be refreshed for it.
Super stuff. Well, look, thanks everyone. We'll call it a day there, and I look forward to seeing you all again on Tuesday, 3rd of May at 12 o'clock.